This is the English language service of Free Radio Europe. Regards from the European Parliament in Strasbourg, where we have just passed a report on the responsible use of artificial intelligence. And I have a guest with you, the coordinator of that report, Eva Maydell, a member from Bulgaria, who has a distinguished career. She is my senior here at the European Parliament in her second term.
Well, that's, I mean, not within politics, but maybe just in the European Parliament.
You were elected at 28.
I was. But, you know, it's no longer seen as a young age in politics. I mean, we have Prime Minister in 30s.
You were Forbes' 30 under 30, Politico's 40 most influential MEPs, Parliament Magazine's New Technologies Award, and so it goes on. I
mean, I'm a bit unprepared to read all your titles, but thanks for emphasizing mine.
And you sit on the Economy Committee, ITRE, and you're Vice Chair of the Delegation for Relations with Japan. But your report has been accepted, including some controversial issues, such as a ban on face recognition. But let us explain to our viewers first what artificial intelligence is. Is there any difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning? Or is it the same thing?
So, first of all, thanks for having me. I think it's great that you have this online engagement with your viewers from Poland and beyond. I like the caption, Free Radio Europe. Of course, it reminds me of Radio Free Europe, which was
accidental.
Absolutely, right? Yeah, because it just is such an important channel in both of our countries and a vital role that it played, you know, from a revolutionary and democratic process point of view. But to go back on your question, I mean, there is no AI without machine learning, right? But it's both terms are difficult to explain because both terms are some sort of a nouveau terms.
I think machine learning actually reflects the nature of the issue better. It's about machines that can learn.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they learn by being fed with data. The better quality of data and information that they have, the better and more accurate results they would produce.
So, for example, if we have a scanner who scans people's bodies for cancer and then learns how to do it better and better, and the more it does it, the more precise it gets. Whereas every human analyst, you have to teach from scratch. And a human analyst can learn on maybe a few hundred cases, whereas a machine gets infinitely better, and therefore we can detect cancer earlier.
Correct. And, you know, there's no worry that your personal data in some way would be shared because there is just a certain amount of data that machine would use, which will not disclose who you are or your other, perhaps, diseases or so on. So what we are trying to do is to better understand how these machines work and how they can help us in our daily lives. And that's why we had this committee for over a year to kind of educate ourselves and to see where to put some sort of guidelines and some sort of, I wouldn't call them rules, but more like create an ethical framework.
I'd like to come back to that, but let's explain what it does. So, for example, driverless cars will be using this technology, right? Analyzing data from several sensors at a time and doing it, let's face it, better than we drive cars.
Well, that's the idea, right? Because it should be able to react faster than
blind spots.
Then we should be able to react in difficult situations. So that's the idea that they could aid us in difficult situations or in a moments of when we are distracted, actually.
In Poland, we have over 3,000 road deaths per annum.
Well, the numbers are pretty high across Europe. That's a very high number, actually. And so it's about bringing together different ways of putting the road tolls of deaths lower, right? And one of them could be technology, could be the way we use technology to regulate traffic, could be the way those autonomous cars are driving. And perhaps the easiest way to think of is some bus lines when they drive on certain lanes that are more straightforward and more clear. It could be a sort of a testing phase for using those autonomous vehicles. But you know, people say, well, what are those two talking out there? That's not the case today. Well, I believe it might not be the case tomorrow either, but it will be the case at some point, because we would like, I think, to become more efficient and to use, you know, the human intelligence for more productive tasks, perhaps.
Machine learning can help us analyze data about society as a whole to guide better government policy. For example, for creating networks of hospitals or for directing state assistance to the truly needy and so on.
Absolutely, and machine learning could do that faster, can do it probably more accurate, and then it's still up to us, right, to kind of take the decision, to see what the analysis tells us, but a machine could just do it faster, and it could analyze the amount of data, as you said, and when you gave the example in the health sector, that it can analyze is just so much more, which gives you a better result in the end and a more accurate result. It feeds you with the better information for you to take the decision, and that's so important.
But it can also do bad things. So when Mr. Putin launches, even before the pandemic, an anti-vax support movement, originally traced back to about 12 accounts, powered by computer bots, that can learn how people react and create the impression of having a conversation with a human being when it's actually a computer, and thereby get people to eventually not to take vaccines.
So absolutely, and we are not shining away from the issues that come with technology, and particularly when it comes to disinformation and influence public opinion by using technology. I think we need to be very clear that, for example, in deep fakes, I mean, AI could power deep fakes, but AI could also detect deep fakes. And so this is why I think in this house, we are the first one in the world to sit down and say, well, let's see where are the opportunities and where are the threats, and how could we limit the threats, and how can we create some sort of an ethical guidance for companies and also for democratic nations in general, because all these autocrats are out there wanting to weaponize AI and to use it against the democratic society.
This was the point that I made in my speech on your report, that this House is humanity's only hope for sensible regulation of AI. The Russians are not going to do it. The Chinese are using it as a state of coercive control over the whole society with the system of total surveillance and social points whereby you are controlled, basically, and incentivized for the authoritarian government all the time, right? And I'm afraid the Americans are not going to do it because Congress is captured by tech companies who are driven by the profit motive.
So, I mean, this is why I think what we have to do, I mean, our most important task today, once this report is adopted and agreed upon, our most important task is to reach out to those democratic allies and to say, look, we're not the ones that are trying to regulate innovation. No, we would like to make sure there is innovation while in the same time we give some guidelines, some democratic norms.
We balance the interests of the industry and the consumers and citizens.
So for the first time when you regulate on something, it has to be proportional. There has to be a balance. So I think our job is to, sit down and speak to our democratic allies and be like, look, there's so many threats around us. If today we do not understand that we need to sit around the table, find a common understanding and work on those topics, it's not just that China will outrival us on that topic, but we'll see Russia Russia, China, and others, use this technology against us. So I think the stakes are pretty high, and I think this is more important for us as European policymakers to focus today, rather than focusing necessarily on exactly how the legislation will work, which is of course important, and that's what we will plan to do with the legislation coming on AI. But this reach out, making those important connections, Canada, US, India, and others, New Zealand, Australia, is going to be more important than ever today.
One of the most controversial issues, one that we decided.
But we did not adopt in the end in the report.
Sure, but the issue was important, whether or not law enforcement agencies should be allowed to use facial recognition. I mean, you could make the argument that if you can prevent a significant number of crimes, then the loss of privacy is maybe worth it. In the end, we voted in favor of law enforcement agencies being able to use this. And so, which was the position of our group, right?
Yes. So exactly. We did not agree, and that was a good point, to ban it entirely. So I would just go a little bit backwards for our viewers. AI is a very broad phenomenon, but for a very long time here in this house, the ideological groups, so to say, that sit on the left side, have been mainly focusing on this one point.
You could make an argument, a right-wing argument on privacy grounds too.
And they have mainly said AI, it's about facial recognition. That's not what AI is all about. That's 5% of the whole story. So what we've been trying to do as EPP is tell the other 95% of the story. But going back particularly on that point, I think it's important that law enforcement agencies are able to use AI on criminal grounds. And when we are, when there's a fugitive on the run, when there's a terrorist attack, it could help us make our societies more secure. We definitely don't want what's happening in China. And I don't think anyone in Europe, within the European Union, will ever, go in that direction.
Oh, I don't know. I can think of a few I
was thinking that you would,
in the European Union who would love to
not
use
for the
this
time being, but they're not doing it, So,
but they're capable of loading Pegasus. But they're capable of other stuff too.
But this is why we have to have some sort of guidance, some sort of rule, some sort of a framework, in order to make sure that if you want to create trustworthy AI, that's the place to be. If you want ethical AI, that's the place you can do it. But we need to gear behind us, our US friends and others.
Europe is not a leader on this technology, is it?
Unfortunately, we are not. Unfortunately, we are not. I heard a colleague recently quote that only 8 out of 200 top companies in that field is based in Europe. So we are not, and this is why I think we need to think strategically about it. We are very often told that we are the gold setters of standards when it comes to tech. And this is a good thing, of course, but it also maybe just lets you be the referee, right? We have to also be the players in that game. So I would like us to think strategically of how we can be the players. And it won't just work when you set standards. It would work when you try that those standards are not just gold, but they're global. It will help when some of those companies collaborate more with their transatlantic allies as well. It will help if some of those companies that are currently based elsewhere decide to find talent in Europe and we start developing our ecosystems. I mean, Poland is a great example of very thriving tech ecosystem, both attracting those that were successful from overseas, but also creating its own. And if we could replicate that in a few other countries, I think there's a lot of ground in attracting investment, but also, having our unicorns, having our good example. I mean, in the health sector. We had some groundbreaking, innovations around COVID, for example. But we also do have our excellent AI companies. They're just few for the time being. And of course, they're not operating with the amount of data some of the big American companies are currently operating. So the less data you have, the less you could, scale your project.
Lastly, there is something that Bulgaria and Poland have in common right now. We've both been cut off from gas supplies by
Indeed.
Mr. Putin.
Indeed, but for different reasons. I think because Bulgaria, in this case, is the weakest link in that situation. Bulgaria wasn't able to give a very, clear view on where it stands, unfortunately, and it's a warning sign for those, because you mentioned some of these countries before, it's a warning sign for those who are trying to either balance or be friends with the autocrat, to see that even if you're trying to balance and be friends with the autocrat, he's still cutting you off your gas supplies. So I think we're in the same situation, but for different reasons.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eva Maydell, congratulations on the adoption of your report.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been the English language section of Free Radio Europe, a European voice in your home. If you like it, please like it, share it, pass it on. Thank you very much and goodbye.